Deep focus is one of the most powerful drivers of faster learning because it directly engages the brain's neuroplastic mechanisms. When you concentrate intensely on a single task without distraction, specific neural circuits in your brain become highly active. This selective activation is critical because the brain does not change uniformly. It changes in a targeted way based on what you are paying attention to. The more precisely you focus, the more precisely your brain rewires itself around that information. At the neurochemical level, deep focus triggers the release of acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that enhances signal clarity between neurons. Acetylcholine acts like a spotlight, increasing the contrast between relevant and irrelevant information. This allows your brain to isolate the exact circuits involved in the task you are trying to learn. At the same time, dopamine is released, which signals that the activity is meaningful and worth reinforcing. Dopamine doesn't just make you feel motivated, it plays a direct role in strengthening synaptic connections, making it easier for those pathways to activate again in the future. Distractions interfere with this entire process. When your attention is constantly shifting, checking your phone, multitasking, or switching between tasks, the brain cannot sustain the level of neural activation required for strong encoding. Each time you switch focus, the brain has to reorient itself, which reduces efficiency and weakens the overall learning signal. Instead of building a strong, stable neural pathway, you end up creating fragmented and less reliable connections. There is also a timing component to deep focus. The brain can maintain peak concentration for limited periods, typically ranging from about 20 to 90 minutes, depending on the individual and the level of training. During these periods, your ability to encode information is significantly elevated. Structuring your learning around these focused intervals allows you to take advantage of the brain's natural rhythms rather than working against them. Another important aspect is the role of effort. Deep focus often feels mentally demanding, especially when you are working on something new or complex. This sense of effort is actually a sign that the correct neural systems are engaged. When learning feels too easy, it usually means you are relying on existing circuits rather than building new ones. By leaning into that effort and maintaining focus despite it, you push your brain into a state where real change can occur. Your environment plays a major role in supporting or disrupting deep focus. Reducing external distractions, creating a dedicated space for learning, and setting clear boundaries around your time can significantly improve your ability to concentrate. Even small changes like silencing notifications or working in a quiet setting can have a measurable impact on how effectively your brain engages in the learning process. With consistent practice, your capacity for deep focus can improve. The brain adapts not only to what you learn, but also to how you learn. By repeatedly entering states of focused attention, you strengthen the neural systems that support concentration itself. Over time, this makes it easier to enter and sustain deep focus, allowing you to learn more efficiently and with greater precision. Error-driven learning is one of the most efficient ways to accelerate how quickly you acquire new skills and information because it directly taps into the brain's natural correction system. When you attempt something and get it wrong, your brain generates what's known as an error signal. This signal is not a failure response. It is a biological instruction that tells your nervous system something needs to be updated. Without these signals, the brain has very little reason to change or improve existing neural pathways. When you make a mistake, specific circuits in the brain, particularly in areas like the anterior cingulate cortex, detect the mismatch between what you intended to do and what actually happened. This mismatch triggers a cascade of neural activity that flags the error as important. At the same time, neuromodulators such as dopamine adjust their release patterns. Instead of simply rewarding success, dopamine also responds to differences between expected and actual outcomes, helping the brain recalibrate its predictions and responses. This is why passive learning methods like rereading or watching content without engagement are far less effective. In those situations, you are not generating meaningful error signals because you are not testing your understanding. The brain remains in a relatively low adaptation state. In contrast, when you actively try to recall information, solve problems, or apply a concept, you create opportunities for mistakes. Each mistake becomes a data point that your brain uses to refine its internal model. The key factor is that the brain learns best when the level of difficulty is appropriately challenging. If something is too easy, you make very few errors and therefore there is minimal signal for improvement. If it is too difficult, the number of errors becomes overwhelming and the brain struggles to extract useful patterns. The optimal zone lies somewhere in between, where you are making frequent but manageable mistakes and can immediately attempt to correct them. Timing also plays a critical role in error-driven learning. The closer the feedback is to the mistake, the more effectively the brain can link the two and update the relevant circuits. Immediate correction strengthens the association between the error and the improved response. Delayed feedback, while still useful, is generally less effective because the neural activity associated with the original attempt has already diminished. There is also a psychological component that influences how well this system works. If errors are perceived as negative or threatening, the brain may shift into a stress response that actually interferes with learning. Elevated stress levels can impair the function of the prefrontal cortex and reduce cognitive flexibility. On the other hand, if errors are approached as informative signals rather than failures, the brain remains in a more adaptive state, allowing for efficient updating of neural pathways. Active recall is one of the most powerful ways to engage error-driven learning. When you try to retrieve information without looking at the answer, you force your brain to reconstruct the knowledge from memory. Any gaps or inaccuracies become immediately apparent, generating error signals that guide improvement. Similarly, applying knowledge in new contexts or testing yourself under slightly challenging conditions strengthens this process. Over time, repeated cycles of attempting, failing, correcting, and refining lead to highly efficient and accurate neural circuits. The brain becomes better at predicting outcomes and executing responses with precision, which is why skills practiced in this way tend to become more robust and long-lasting compared to those learned through passive exposure. Sleep is one of the most powerful biological tools for enhancing learning speed because it is the phase during which the brain stabilizes and reorganizes information acquired during the day. When you are awake and actively learning, the brain temporarily stores new information in structures like the hippocampus. This storage is fragile and limited in capacity. Without sleep, much of this newly acquired information remains unstable and is easily lost or overwritten by new inputs. During deep sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep, the brain begins a process often referred to as memory consolidation. Neural patterns that were activated during learning are replayed in a coordinated way, strengthening the connections between neurons. This replay is not random. It selectively reinforces information that was tagged as important during wakefulness, often through attention and emotional relevance. As these patterns are repeated during sleep, they are gradually transferred from short-term storage in the hippocampus to more distributed and stable networks in the cortex. REM sleep plays a complementary role by integrating new information with existing knowledge. During this phase, the brain is highly active, and different regions communicate more freely. This allows for abstraction, pattern recognition, and the formation of connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information. This is why after a good night's sleep, you may find that you understand a concept more deeply or can solve a problem more easily, even without additional practice. Neurochemically, sleep creates an environment that supports plasticity. Levels of certain neuromodulators, such as acetylcholine and norepinephrine, fluctuate in ways that facilitate the strengthening and pruning of synaptic connections. At the same time, the brain undergoes metabolic cleanup processes, removing waste products that accumulate during wakefulness. This restoration is essential for maintaining efficient neural function and preventing cognitive fatigue. Lack of sleep disrupts these processes in multiple ways. When sleep is insufficient, the hippocampus becomes less effective at encoding new information, meaning that even if you spend time studying, your brain is not properly storing what you learn. In addition, the communication between the hippocampus and the cortex is impaired, reducing the effectiveness of consolidation. This results in weaker memory traces and reduced ability to recall information later. Sleep deprivation also affects attention and emotional regulation, both of which are critical for learning. Reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex makes it harder to focus and engage in complex thinking, while increased reactivity in emotional centers can lead to distraction and stress. These changes create a feedback loop where poor sleep leads to poor learning, and poor learning often leads to increased frustration and cognitive strain. The timing of sleep relative to learning is also important. Sleeping soon after learning enhances retention because it allows the brain to begin consolidation while the neural patterns are still fresh. Even short naps can provide benefits, particularly if they include stages of deep or REM sleep. These naps can act as a form of mini consolidation, improving memory and performance within the same day. Consistency in sleep patterns further enhances these effects. Going to sleep and waking up at regular times helps regulate your circadian rhythm, which in turn stabilizes hormone release, energy levels, and cognitive function. This regularity ensures that your brain is consistently entering the stages of sleep that are most beneficial for learning and memory processing. Your physiological state acts as a control system that determines how effectively your brain can learn, process, and retain information. The brain is constantly monitoring signals from the body: heart rate, breathing patterns, hormone levels, and energy availability, and using that data to adjust how it allocates attention and cognitive resources. This means that learning speed is not just about mental effort. It is heavily dependent on whether your body is in a state that supports or interferes with neural processing. A key player in this process is the autonomic nervous system, which regulates your level of alertness and stress. When you are in a moderately alert state, often referred to as optimal arousal, your brain is primed for learning. In this state, levels of neuromodulators like dopamine and norepinephrine are balanced in a way that enhances attention, motivation, and memory formation. You feel engaged, focused, and capable of handling challenges without becoming overwhelmed. If your stress levels become too high, the system shifts into a more extreme sympathetic response. This leads to elevated cortisol and adrenaline, which can initially sharpen attention but quickly begin to impair cognitive function if sustained. Under high stress, the brain prioritizes survival-related processing over learning. The prefrontal cortex, which is essential for reasoning, planning, and flexible thinking, becomes less effective. At the same time, more reactive brain regions take over, making your thoughts more rigid and less adaptable. On the opposite end, if your level of arousal is too low, such as when you are fatigued or disengaged, the brain does not generate enough activation to support strong learning. In this state, attention drifts, information is processed superficially, and memory encoding is weak. This is why trying to learn when you are overly tired or mentally drained often results in poor retention, even if you spend a significant amount of time studying. Breathing is one of the fastest ways to influence this system. The pattern and rhythm of your breath send direct signals to the brain about your internal state. Slow, controlled breathing can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing stress and stabilizing attention. On the other hand, rapid or shallow breathing can increase feelings of anxiety and make it harder to concentrate. By consciously adjusting your breathing, you can shift your brain into a state that is more conducive to learning. Energy availability also plays a crucial role. The brain consumes a large portion of the body's energy, and it relies on a steady supply of glucose and oxygen to function properly. When energy levels drop, cognitive processes slow down, attention becomes inconsistent, and the ability to form new memories declines. Maintaining stable energy through proper nutrition and hydration supports sustained mental performance and reduces cognitive fatigue. Physical posture and movement can subtly influence your mental state as well. Sitting in a slouched or compressed position can reduce alertness and breathing efficiency, while an upright posture supports better oxygen flow and engagement. Brief bouts of physical activity can quickly increase blood flow to the brain, improving focus and readiness to learn. Even a few minutes of movement can shift your physiological state enough to enhance cognitive performance. Your internal state is not fixed. It can be adjusted in real time. Small interventions like taking a short walk, regulating your breath, or changing your environment can create immediate improvements in how your brain functions. Over time, consistently managing your physiological state helps create a stable foundation for faster learning, better memory, and overall cognitive health. Spacing and repetition are fundamental to how the brain builds strong, lasting memories, because neural circuits do not stabilize instantly after a single exposure. When you first learn something, the connections between neurons are fragile and easily disrupted. Repetition is what strengthens those connections, but the timing of that repetition is what determines how durable and efficient the learning becomes. When information is revisited after a gap of time, the brain is forced to reactivate the neural circuits associated with that memory. This reactivation is not a passive process. It requires effort to reconstruct the information. That effort is what strengthens the pathway. Each time the circuit is re-engaged, the synaptic connections become more robust and the signal travels more efficiently. This is very different from simply reviewing something repeatedly in a short period, where the brain relies on temporary familiarity rather than true encoding. The spacing effect takes advantage of this mechanism by introducing intervals between learning sessions. When you allow time to pass before revisiting material, a small amount of forgetting occurs. While this might seem counterproductive, it actually enhances learning because it forces the brain to work harder to retrieve the information. That increased effort generates stronger neural reinforcement compared to immediate repetition, where the information is still easily accessible in short-term memory. This process is closely tied to how the hippocampus and cortex interact. Initially, the hippocampus rapidly encodes new information, but it has limited storage capacity. Through repeated reactivation over time, the information is gradually transferred to the cortex, where it becomes more stable and integrated with existing knowledge. Spacing allows this transfer process to occur more effectively, reducing reliance on short-term storage and building long-term memory. Breaks between learning sessions also play an important role. During these periods, the brain continues to process and organize information in the background. This offline processing can lead to subtle improvements in understanding and retention, even without active study. It also prevents mental fatigue, which can reduce the quality of attention and weaken encoding if learning is pushed for too long without rest. Repetition itself must be meaningful to be effective. Simply rereading or passively reviewing material does not engage the brain deeply enough to create strong connections. Active repetition, such as recalling information from memory, explaining it in your own words, or applying it in different contexts, produces much stronger reinforcement. These methods require the brain to reconstruct and manipulate the information, which strengthens the underlying circuits more efficiently. There is also an optimal pattern to spacing. Intervals that gradually increase over time tend to produce the best results. For example, reviewing material after one day, then a few days later, and then again after a longer gap, helps maintain the strength of the memory while continuously challenging the brain to retrieve it. This approach keeps the neural circuits active without allowing them to weaken significantly. Consistency is what ultimately determines the effectiveness of spacing and repetition. The brain adapts to what is practiced regularly, and repeated exposure over time signals that the information is important and should be retained. By structuring learning in spaced intervals and engaging in active repetition, you align with the brain's natural mechanisms for memory formation, leading to faster learning and more durable retention. Movement and nutrition play a central role in how efficiently your brain learns because they directly influence the biological environment in which neural activity takes place. The brain is an energy-intensive organ, and its ability to form, strengthen, and maintain connections depends heavily on the availability of oxygen, nutrients, and specific growth factors that support neuroplasticity. Physical movement, particularly aerobic exercise, increases blood flow to the brain. This enhanced circulation delivers more oxygen and glucose, which are essential for neural activity. At the same time, exercise stimulates the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a protein that supports the growth, survival, and strengthening of neurons. BDNF is often described as a key molecule for learning because it makes neural circuits more adaptable and responsive to experience. When BDNF levels are elevated, the brain is in a state that is highly conducive to forming new connections. Exercise also influences neurotransmitter systems that regulate mood, motivation, and attention. Dopamine and serotonin levels tend to increase following physical activity, which can improve focus and create a more positive mental state for learning. This is important because motivation and emotional state directly affect how deeply you engage with information. Even short bouts of movement, such as a brisk walk, can lead to noticeable improvements in cognitive performance and readiness to learn. Timing of movement can further enhance its effects. Engaging in physical activity before learning can prime the brain by increasing alertness and neurochemical readiness. Movement after learning may help consolidate information by promoting circulation and supporting recovery processes. Over the long term, consistent exercise contributes to structural changes in the brain, including improved connectivity and increased volume in areas associated with memory and executive function. Nutrition provides the raw materials the brain needs to operate effectively. Stable blood glucose levels are essential for maintaining consistent cognitive performance. Large fluctuations in energy availability can lead to periods of mental fatigue, reduced attention, and impaired memory formation. Consuming balanced meals that include a combination of carbohydrates, proteins, and healthy fats helps sustain energy levels and supports steady brain function. Certain nutrients are particularly important for neural health. Amino acids from protein sources are used to produce neurotransmitters, which are critical for communication between neurons. Omega-3 fatty acids contribute to the structural integrity of cell membranes, improving the efficiency of neural signaling. Vitamins and minerals, such as B vitamins, magnesium, and zinc, play supporting roles in energy metabolism and synaptic function. Hydration is another often overlooked factor. Even mild dehydration can negatively impact attention, processing speed, and short-term memory. The brain relies on proper fluid balance to maintain optimal electrical activity, and insufficient hydration can disrupt this balance, leading to reduced cognitive performance. The interaction between movement and nutrition creates a synergistic effect. Proper nutrition ensures that the brain has the resources it needs, while movement enhances the delivery and utilization of those resources. Together, they create a physiological state that supports faster learning, better memory retention, and overall brain health. Movement and nutrition play a central role in how efficiently your brain learns because they directly influence the biological environment in which neural activity takes place. The brain is an energy-intensive organ, and its ability to form, strengthen, and maintain connections depends heavily on the availability of oxygen, nutrients, and specific growth factors that support neuroplasticity. Physical movement, particularly aerobic exercise, increases blood flow to the brain. This enhanced circulation delivers more oxygen and glucose, which are essential for neural activity. At the same time, exercise stimulates the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a protein that supports the growth, survival, and strengthening of neurons. BDNF is often described as a key molecule for learning because it makes neural circuits more adaptable and responsive to experience. When BDNF levels are elevated, the brain is in a state that is highly conducive to forming new connections. Exercise also influences neurotransmitter systems that regulate mood, motivation, and attention. Dopamine and serotonin levels tend to increase following physical activity, which can improve focus and create a more positive mental state for learning. This is important because motivation and emotional state directly affect how deeply you engage with information. Even short bouts of movement, such as a brisk walk, can lead to noticeable improvements in cognitive performance and readiness to learn. Timing of movement can further enhance its effects. Engaging in physical activity before learning can prime the brain by increasing alertness and neurochemical readiness. Movement after learning may help consolidate information by promoting circulation and supporting recovery processes. Over the long term, consistent exercise contributes to structural changes in the brain, including improved connectivity and increased volume in areas associated with memory and executive function. Nutrition provides the raw materials the brain needs to operate effectively. Stable blood glucose levels are essential for maintaining consistent cognitive performance. Large fluctuations in energy availability can lead to periods of mental fatigue, reduced attention, and impaired memory formation. Consuming balanced meals that include a combination of carbohydrates, proteins, and healthy fats helps sustain energy levels and support steady brain function. Certain nutrients are particularly important for neural health. Amino acids from protein sources are used to produce neurotransmitters, which are critical for communication between neurons. Omega-3 fatty acids contribute to the structural integrity of cell membranes, improving the efficiency of neural signaling. Vitamins and minerals, such as B vitamins, magnesium, and zinc, play supporting roles in energy metabolism and synaptic function. Hydration is another often overlooked factor. Even mild dehydration can negatively impact attention, processing speed, and short-term memory. The brain relies on proper fluid balance to maintain optimal electrical activity, and insufficient hydration can disrupt this balance, leading to reduced cognitive performance. The interaction between movement and nutrition creates a synergistic effect. Proper nutrition ensures that the brain has the resources it needs, while movement enhances the delivery and utilization of those resources. Together, they create a physiological state that supports faster learning, better memory retention, and overall brain health. When these elements are consistently aligned, regular movement, stable nutrition, and proper hydration, they not only enhance your ability to learn in the moment, but also build a long-term foundation for sharper cognition, greater mental energy, and more efficient brain function over time.